get out of here tonight and read the book, you will see that she is one of the main characters. Hey, let's give a big round of applause for Louise and Wallace. They have both of their fathers crippling me for attention. Did that go out?
Yes.
A little bit. It's okay. All right. Look at that.
There you go.
There we go. It's just a real honor to have Gloria here, and I was very grateful she accepted the invitation. She's one of the main characters in the book, and we'll get into the structure of it, but came to really represent to me the hope of tomorrow, and the idea that all of the history in the first 3 quarters of the book wasn't just set in stone as an epitaph, but that there was a road forward. And so thank you so much for making the drive over from Drew.
Welcome.
I guess the best place to start is, I'll tell you a little bit about the book, and then she and I are going to talk about her history and about the land where the barn is. The book is called The Barn, and it is about the barn in Sunflower County where Emmett Till was killed. And I found out about it in the pandemic. I didn't know that it was, I'd never heard of it. And it's just a barn. It's full of Christmas decorations and duck hunting stuff and a Johnson 9.9 horsepower outboard motor. The guy who owns it is lovely. I'm sure many of you know Jeff Andrews, and Drew, who's a dentist. And he's been really helpful and generous to the members of the Till family who like to go out there. And the first act of the book is telling the story of this murder, and it's through a character named Willie Reed, who grew up not far from where Gloria's parents were farmers in Sunflower County. And Willie Reed is one of the witnesses of the murder. He was walking that Sunday morning to go get stuff to bring home to cook for breakfast. He was 18 years old. He walked out of his house and he walked down the Drew to Ruleville Road. I don't know if people are familiar, but it's that gravel road that runs like literally from Drew out to Highway 8, sort of in between Ruleville and Cleveland. And he was cutting through the Milam place to go to Patterson's Country Store. If there are any folks who grew up in Drew, that was sort of back there near like where Radio Road and the Drew Marigold Road is now. And he was walking there, and a green and white Chevrolet two-tone pickup truck pulled in front of him, and Emmett Till was in the back of the truck. And J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant and others were in the truck. And they took him into the barn, and Willie Reed heard everything that happened, heard the pistol whipping and the screams, and he heard the screams turn to whimpers, and the whimpers turned to silence. And he was 18 years old, and everyone in his family said, don't say anything. And he decided that he was so close in age to Emmett that he needed to say something, and he agreed to testify at 18 years old. Unbelievably, he and Moses Wright were the first two black Mississippians who had ever accused a white Mississippian of murder in open court. That was the first time that had ever happened. And it was incredibly dangerous. They both had to leave. Willie Reed had to leave in the middle of the night, and he walked 6 miles to the highway, to the old Highway 8, sort of outside of Louisville, where a car picked him up. The driver of that car was Med Carruthers, and drove him to the Memphis airport and put him on a plane, and they flew him to Chicago. A member of the Mississippi National Guard flew up there and went and sort of to intimidate him, and went and found him, just sort of let him know, hey, we know where you are. He had a nervous breakdown. He went into a hospital. He changed his name from Willie Reed to Willie Lewis, and he met a woman named Juliet, who I think you've met Juliet. Juliet is still alive. She lives in Inglewood on the south side of Chicago. And they were together for 12 or 15 years before she found out that his name had been Willie Reed. He never said a single word about it. And in 2004, the FBI asked him to come back to Mississippi because they were going to reopen the case. And So they flew him to Memphis and to the same airport where he left, and he came down to the Delta. The FBI agent was with him, a guy named Dale Killinger, Army Ranger, combat veteran, said the most emotional thing he's ever seen is that Willie Lewis turned to Willie Reed in front of him, and this old man lost his balance because everything he'd known was gone. I mean, you told me that the road that your parents grew up on was called the Busy Line because there were so many sharecropping houses up and down this road. That entire universe was gone. All of those houses were gone. All of those people were gone, but somehow the barn was still there. And the first act of the book is the story of a murder in which the dominant energy is how could this possibly have happened. The second act of the book is where I'd like to bring Gloria in. The barn is located, many of you know, this is a lot of farming folks here, land is measured in townships and ranges. And so the barn is Township 22 North, Range 4 West, measured from the Choctaw Meridian. And the book quickly turned into a 1,300-year history of these 36 square miles of land around this barn. And inside that square of land is where your parents, where your mother went back several generations, and where your mother and father met and fell in love, and where they lived and where you were raised. I wonder if you could tell people a little bit, tell them who your parents were, and a little bit about what they were like, because I never had the pleasure of meeting them.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and I'll be glad to talk about that. My mom and my dad. My mom was May Bertha Carter, my dad was Matthew Carter. And they were sharecroppers on the farm, and they had 13 children together. And I was the 9th child of that 13 children. And so my mom was always very, very interested in getting us out of poverty. She said that was her dream. That's what she wanted to do for all of her 13 children. She said, I have a lot of children, they're not going to live in poverty for the rest of their lives. So she said, I'm willing to take some risk or whatever I need to do to make sure that they don't live in poverty. And so she stressed to us over and over the importance of education. And she also stressed to us how disappointed she was that we weren't able to get a good education because we were in the fields picking cotton. And so I was in the field picking cotton when I was 10 years old. And my mom would be so upset, and my dad, because during the school year, we had to get out of school and pick the cotton. So we were only with the school for about 6 months out of the year, where she said, the white kids are going to school 9 months out of the year. Surely they're going to be more educated than you. And so how are you going to be able to take advantage of opportunities if there's no justice in where my kids go to school and when my kids go to school? So she talked about that all the time, about how we were being treated and how she wanted to do better for her family. And my dad was the same way. And one of the things I also remember when I was really young, probably about 10 or 11 years old, Mama would talk so much about justice and fighting for justice that when we lived on the farm, and we would have to drive into Drew in order to get groceries and things. And we'd have to pass the barn where Emmett Till was killed. And what she would say to us, even as long as I can remember, that's the barn that Emmett Till was killed in. And we kept saying, Mama, who's Emmett Till? And so she went into who he was, how he got killed and everything. And then when my younger sisters and brothers came along, when we passed the barn, we'd tell them, hey, that's why Emmett Till was killed. And they would go through the same thing, well, who was Emmett Till? And then we'd tell that whole story again about what happened to him. And she said he was killed here, and they took him over to Tallahatchie County and put him in the river. And then his mom found it. They found him later, and his mom brought him back to Chicago to bury him. But she was telling us all that because she was saying there is no justice in this world. And there may not be any justice for my children. I'm really concerned about my kids. And she wanted us to have the best. And so she built on that. I mean, we did some things that where we did, that's what she was saying in the introduction, we did integrate a school in Drew, Mississippi in 1965. And I was one of 7 kids that went to school in Drew in 1965. It was 7 of us, even though Mama had 13 kids, 5 had already graduated from high school. But to our surprise, when we got there, we were the only ones there. And we were looking around for the other kids and like, where are they? Why did they come? This is freedom of choice. And if you want to choose a school, you'll choose the one that has the longer days. You'll choose the ones that you don't have to be in Cottonville. You go to school every day. So we wanted to go to to school every day. That's why we chose that school. We want to go to school every day. We want to ride on a nice bus. We don't want our buses to be breaking down when we get out of school. We know that Mama had talked about how they got better books, they got better labs, they got all kinds of things. And we were so excited about going. And when we got there, we were shocked. We were not shocked, not only because no other black kids came, but we were in wonder, why? Why would nobody else come? Why are they not here? And then we were shocked because the way we were treated. We were like, they say we should come here, but they're treating us like they don't want us here. And we went home that first day, and we said, Mama, we didn't expect that. They act like they don't even want us at the school, but they said it was a freedom of choice. Finally, Mama came to the conclusion it was just a hoax. It was just a hoax. They really was trying to get you to go, but they thought everybody in this county was afraid to do it. And everybody else was afraid to come. Because I really didn't know what was going on back then, you see, because I thought, okay, I was 12 years old, and I didn't know the animosity was like that. I didn't know, I had heard about the Freedom Riders and the Freedom Summer and all that, but I really didn't know it was so deep inside of people where they would not want you there, and they would mistreat you. They mistreated us too. So we took a lot of them, and we did it for 5 years. I never missed a day out of school. I was there every day. Even though they said I couldn't learn, I couldn't study, I couldn't do this, it was like negativity about us all day long.
So what year was that that you went first?
1965 was the first year that we went.
And what year was North Sunflower Academy founded?
North Sunflower Academy was founded, I think, in 1970.
Okay.
Because we won the lawsuit. Well, our family, my 7 sisters and brother and I, we sued the school. We sued the Drew School District. Mary Wright Thompson was our lawyer, and she also inspired by her. And we said freedom of choice plans are an intolerable burden to the children who go there. We know you say they can go into school that they want to. You know you're telling the parents that, but we also know that if you didn't need it, and when you get there, the teachers as well as the students don't mistreat them. So we sued the school district to throw out the freedom of choice plan. And then I think that lawsuit was won in 1969 or 1969. And the freedom of choice plans were thrown out. We were part of a class action suit. And the schools in Mississippi had to be integrated all over the state. No more freedom of choice plans were acceptable. So we didn't do that.
So in the second act of this, there are a lot of heroes and villains, and it's a 1,300-year history of every person and every dollar in and out of these 36 square miles. And your mother is just, like, my favorite story is that when the plantation manager came to throw you guys out of your house, after your house had been shot up, your dad's, up on the roof with a gun, and they come to try to throw you off. Your mother had a record player and a record of John F. Kennedy giving his famous civil rights speech, which, by the way, one of the many things the book reveals is the shocking connection between political rhetoric and violence. I mean, we're seeing it right now. I mean, both ways. We're seeing it right now. But there was a Mississippi gubernatorial election in 1955 that the election was on a Tuesday, and Emmett whistled at the store on a Wednesday. But that John F. Kennedy speech happened, and the next day is when Medgar Evers was killed. The day after that speech. I mean, there's always been a relationship between political speech and citizen violence. But your mother takes this record player out and puts it on the porch. So the plantation manager is telling your dad that you guys have to leave, and she plays this record. Every time I drive, I don't know if I've ever told you this, like every time I drive down that road, like you're going to Zumbro, past where your old church was, where the cemetery is on the left, I stop and go and take people over to that cemetery where your parents are buried. Because I just feel like they should be on money or something, like they should really be remembered. There's also a woman who's buried in that cemetery who has an engraved slot machine on her tombstone, so I always show people that. One of the things that I thought was so interesting about, it worked. I mean, you and all of your siblings, I mean, it's incredible the many, many degrees. I mean, you have your sister who ran that hospital in New York City that's a wing of it's named after her. I don't know, did you feel like you and your siblings lived up to your parents' sacrifices with the education you got and the work that you've gotten?
Oh yes, I do. It was, I speak to kids a lot, and I say it was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. But the best came out of it for us. So, yeah, I think it was. They said, was it worth it? Yes, it was worth it. Even though we went through, went through hell. It was awful, but it still was worth it because my mom and dad taught us a lot about what it is to fight for your rights and know what your rights are and to go after them no matter what. And she said she was willing to just give her life for it. That's what she said. Because she said she would get on the bed and pray every morning that we got on that bus. She prayed and prayed that all of her children would come home because she had so many doubts about whether we would all come home. She thought something may happen to us. But she did it anyway, and we did it anyway. And she called that courage. And what she said, you got to have courage. And one of the most amazing things is my little sister was only 6 years old when this happened, and they had a rough time at school being a 6-year-old.
Wallace is 6 if you want the middle picture.
Yeah, she was 6 years old and nobody to play with her. Teacher said don't play with her. We all went through a lot, but we all came out of it with a desire. And Mom always said, just before she died, fighting for justice is a lifelong journey. You're not will ever be able to stop doing it, and you need to keep doing it. And so, that's why when I came back to Drew, I said, she taught us that the fight is not going to be over, even though we went through what we went through. The fight is still not over. And you asked me earlier, the academy came up in 1970, right after we won that suit. But all the kids left the school and went to the private academy. And in one of our videos, in Tolerable Burden, the lady who was there, she said, they went to the academy, and they're still there, and they're going to be there forever. And so that's still the attitude that we went, and they're not coming back to the public schools. So it all still has its effect on what happens today.
It's interesting. I mean, your parents are from this square of land. Nathan Bedford Forrest's brother had his place in this square of land, and actually Nathan Bedford Forrest's brother was the commissioner who built the Drew to Louisville Road that the barn where Emmett Till was killed is on. I don't want to spoil the book because I'm also trying to sell them. The history of Mississippi and America that converges seemingly randomly on this square of land is incredible. And May, Bertha, and Matthew are absolutely two of the heroes of it. So the second act of the book takes you essentially from prehistory, when the land was uninhabited, through, most of the Mississippi Delta was uninhabited hardwood swamps until like 1890. So, after Geronimo was captured, after the shootout at the OK Corral, most of the Mississippi Delta was uninhabited. Until 1900, you couldn't get a life insurance policy if you lived in the Mississippi Delta. Like, they would literally, no one would insure you. And if manifest destiny is the root of the American psyche, there is a case to be made that the exact geographic center of the Mississippi Delta was the last place in the lower 48 to be settled, and the exact geographic center of the Mississippi Delta is Township 22 North, Range 4 West. I have a railroad map that shows the Yellow Dog and the Southern, and the Peavine and one other one, and they're all converging, and eventually we're all connected. But on this map, it shows that the last place unconnected by railroads was this exact square of land. And so the second act of the book takes you through back to 1955, and then we tell you the story of the murder again, except this time, instead of it being, how could this possibly have happened, there is a sense of menacing inevitability. And it's told differently, and they're all different characters. And then the fourth act I call Tomorrow, and it was not going to be part of the book. And this is, I think the main reason why I asked Gloria to come and why you were so generous to make the time. The last act of the book, it's called Tomorrow, because when I first started doing this, the book was going to end. It was going to be the murder, the history, and then the murder. And then I started meeting people. I met, Reverend Wheeler Parker, who some of you might know, Wheeler Parker is a Kojic Church of God in Christ minister in Argo, Illinois. Argo is where the Argo Starch Company is. They make Cairo syrup. They make Argo starch. They call that little town Little Mississippi. Everybody in that town is from the Mississippi Delta. Everybody. There's a group of, like, when I started the book, there's a group of about 12 old men who'd gone to school with Emmett Till, who would still get together at the bowling alley like once a week to have a beer and a coffee and talk. I think that group is now down to 8. I mean, they're dying every day, the people who actually knew him. I mean, it won't be long until there'll be no human being left alive who actually knew Emmett Till. But, you know, Reverend Parker was Emmett's cousin, best friend, rode the train south with him, was in the house with him the night he was kidnapped. J.W. Milam pointed the gun in his face first, and he has spent his whole life trying to keep people from forgetting. I went with him to the African American History Museum in D.C. You were on that trip, and they opened the museum just for us. We were the only people in there, and he went in to see Emmett's casket. Emmett was exhumed in 2004 because the FBI had to reopen the case. As an aside, the reason they had to exhume him is, tell me if this sounds familiar, the defense attorney's case that was accepted by the jury, this was their theory of the murder, that the NAACP in cahoots with labor unions and the Communist Party, this is real, this is not exaggerated, like this is real, had gotten a body out of a morgue, either in Chicago or Detroit, probably Chicago they thought, and had dumped it in the Tallahatchie River after mutilating it, had gotten a gin fan and thrown him in the river with the hopes that maybe this body would surface, and that when it would surface it would be found, and that they had, that Emmett Till was a real kid, but he was alive and well, and Mamie, he was in Detroit or Chicago they thought, but probably Detroit, and that Mamie was lying on the witness stand about this body being her son because she had been paid off with a phony life insurance policy, and that all of these witnesses, Amanda Bradley, Willie Reed, Moses Wright, these sharecroppers who were living in poverty, were actually like Manchurian communist plants in the Mississippi Delta who had been sit here to incubate for several generations so that they could take down the good white people of Mississippi, and that all of this was a communist plot to make white Mississippians look bad because they thought that the white Mississippians were the only thing standing in the way of communist Russia taking over the United States of America. And that is what the jury said happened. And so they had to exhume the body, because they had to prove, if they went back to trial, that the body they buried in Burr Oak Cemetery was Emmett Till. They got his cousin Simeon Wright. Did you ever, you knew Simeon, didn't you?
I didn't. I read his book.
And they got Simeon's DNA. And of course the body in the ground was Emmett Till, because the conspiracies are never true. But, so the original casket is in the African American History Museum. And Wheeler Parker walked out of that room. I'm professionally nosy. I mean, I'm a reporter. I followed Gloria around for a long time. I'm really sorry about that. But I couldn't go in the room with him. It just felt like I didn't need to be there, you know. And so when he walked out of the room, he was just making noises. I mean, it was not, you know, he sat there for a while and we started walking out. And finally, when he could talk again, what he said was, we can't let people forget. And so there are people like Wheeler Parker and his wife Marvell, like Christopher Benson, like Patrick Weems, who many of you know, in Sumner, Mississippi. And I mean, Patrick, you talk about putting your money where your mouth is. I mean, this guy's the real thing. I mean, I asked him one time, I'm like, are you armed? And he was like, no, I guess I'm just stupid. And I was like, well, you know, what's that? What's the tool? He should have armed himself. I mean, like, I was like, for Christmas, I want to get Patrick a gun. But he's doing incredibly brave work, making people remember. And then I met Gloria, who is being modest, had a very successful career, corporate America, executive, should have retired to a beach somewhere, and instead bought a house in Drew, Mississippi, and came home. I believe your siblings were like, "What are you doing?"
Why are you doing this? Why would you go back there? You know.
And so one of the things I was really hoping you could articulate is why it's important for people in Drew and in Sunflower County and in the neighboring counties, in Bolivar County, where we're from, and in Kahoma County, where I grew up. Why is it important that people know what happened to Emmett Till and where it happened to your students who are in your mentorship programs?
And yes, I think it's important because we want the history to be told. You know, we have to tell our history and make sure the truth comes out. And we do that. We need to do that for our children as well, because I have a program called, one of my programs is called Emmett Till Academy. And I teach young people about Emmett Till, but I also teach them more than just about Emmett Till. I try to teach them the whole history of where they come from, starting with their ancestors who came from Africa, all the way through the movement, all the way through Emmett Till getting killed. I guess Emmett Till got killed first, and then the movement really took off. And then all the way through what's going on now, and try to connect it, because a lot of my young people are like, we don't know what's going on, we don't know why this is important, we don't know the connection. And they need to know that, because in order for me to really survive at Drew High School when I did, my mom taught us a lot about where we came from and why we are important. And she taught us, you are not inferior. Well, she knew society was trying to make black people, society was trying to make black people feel like they were inferior to them. And so I don't want the younger people now, when they're born into something like this, to continue to think that they're inferior just because they don't have what other people have. So it's important to know how they got here, why they were born into such what they're in right now, trying to survive, not knowing why things are happening the way they are, not knowing why the opportunities are not out there for them. So we need to let them know that you are good people. And that's what Mom always told, you're good people, even though some in society want to say that you're not even human. And that doesn't need to happen to our children. It didn't need to happen to me. And I'm so grateful to my mom and my dad, because they taught us that you're inferior to no one, you're not superior to no one, you are a great human being. There are people out there who are trying to hold you back just because of what you look like. And we're not going to let that happen. You came here to live, you came here to live a good life, a thriving life, and I'm going to make sure that that's what you all do. So now I don't know whether we as a generation are talking to our children enough to let them know, even though they may not be in a certain circumstances now, that, you know, they're still good people and they can have. And so when I got out and had a good career and, you know, made lots of money and went off to Battle Creek, Michigan to work at the Kellogg Foundation, then when I left, I said, I came back to Drew, and they asked me to come back to speak about when I was at Drew High School. And they were asking me, you know, what was it like? Do I regret it? I told them the same thing. It might have been the worst of times, but it was the best of times for me, because it set me on a journey to thriving. But what I saw when I got back there is like, we know we put our lives on the line for 5 years inside that school. I went back to the school, and it was a total disaster. And I'm like, they didn't have books. They had book packs with nothing in it. They didn't have computers. They didn't have a restroom. They had to go home and use the restroom. I said, now, why are my people, my neighbors, when I left, why are they living like this now? What's going on? And so that's when I said, I got to go back. I got to go back, because they need to know that they can have, they need to know that they're important, they need to have self-confidence, they need to take some pride in who they are, and they need somebody to show them the way. And so that's why I came back to Drew. You know, at first people were kind of like, why is she coming back here? What she want? What's in it for? I didn't come back with a grant, I can tell you that. I did not come back with a grant. I came back with nothing but myself, my own self. That's what I came back with, myself. No grant, use my own money. $1,000 of my own money, okay? Just to be able to get to these young people, and just to be able to get to their parents as well, and start talking to them about their potential and what they could be, and that nothing should hold them back. And so when I started the Emmett Till Academy, I said they need more than, they need to know why they're here. And you talk about Emmett Till being murdered, and we always talk about, well, he didn't get justice. Well, we know he didn't get justice. But what caused all of this? I mean, And how can we get out of this cycle that we're in so things like this will quit happening? So we go all the way to I take them all the way up to like George Floyd and say things are still happening to us that shouldn't be happening. So you need to know who you are, where you came from, and be proud of who you are, and then also want you to start advocating. Advocate for change, to change this world to a better place. And so that's my focus with them, to change it. And nobody should have to go through what I went through, and my sisters and brothers went through, just to get an education. You know.
You posed that question to me sitting in your office about we know we didn't get justice, but why did this happen? And one of the things that's so interesting, and I mean, there are a lot of farming folks in here. Price of cotton, I just looked, it's 74 cents a pound. It's up, but it's still below production, so I think those of us in the Delta are going to get crushed. But the degree, I didn't realize the degree to which from its founding, from the invention of the cotton gin until the collapse of the price of cotton in 1923, and then really the takeover of the cotton and then the farming economy by the federal government in 1933, Mississippi was essentially a colony of Manchester, Liverpool, London, and New York City. I mean, almost all of this money flowed out of Mississippi. The Money Planning Company was owned by Charles Merrill of Merrill Lynch. I mean, there was big old money all over here. And then from 1933 now, I mean, the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, which was deemed unconstitutional and replaced by the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1936, which invented crop insurance, it invented parity payments, and invented subsidies. And so basically, the state of Mississippi was a colony to guarantee 10% return on investment for banks in Manchester, Liverpool, New York, and London, and then it was a ward of the United States government. And so, there has never been a time where it wasn't totally dependent. And you ask how this happened, this is the only part of the book that I'm going to read, but it's fitting with the statue that's out there right now. The Great Mississippi Delta cotton boom lasted 20 years. The suffering and killing and decay that would follow for the next century were the price of 3 great years and a dozen good ones. These 2 decades also marked the peak of the lost cause mythology. Consider when all of these Confederate statues went up around the state. Consider the history of cotton in the Delta. The land clearing finished around 1900. The price of cotton collapsed for good in 1923. And what happened in between? Port Gibson and Aberdeen raised statues in 1900. Macon in 1901. Fayette in 1904. Carrollton and Beulah in Okolona in 1905. Tupelo and Ole Miss in 1906. Brandon and Oxford and West Point in 1907. Cleveland and Lexington and Raymond and Duck Hill in 1908. Greenville and Winona in 1909. Hattiesburg twice and Grenada in 1910. Gulfport and Kosciuszko and Quitman and Ripley and Brookville and Heidelberg in 1911. Columbus and Laurel and Meridian and Philadelphia and Vaden in 1912. Greenwood and Sumner in 1913. Greenwood again in 1915. Hazelhurst in 1917. Louisville in 1921. Many of these were placed quite intentionally on the lawns of local courthouses, sending a message about the law and whom it was designed to protect. Most of the monuments around the state were built during the brief but emotionally powerful cotton boom. Not a single courthouse statue in the state of Mississippi was erected after 1923. The lost cause was always about cotton and money. Which brings me to the question. You drive around the Delta. I don't know, there feels like some cosmic connection, not just here but everywhere, that the more valuable land is, the less valuable human life is. If you've ever talked to a farmer, the only variable in the equation that you can control is the price you pay for labor, because you can't control the price of the equipment, you can't control the price of the seeds or the chemicals, you can't control the weather, you can't control the price you sell your product for. I mean, Richard basically, I think, gets to set a book price.
Not exactly.
Richard gets to set a book price. But, you know, the farmer, you make what the market says. The only X in that equation that you can control is the labor. You drive around the Delta, and it feels like and, you know, I say this like nobody in this room, except maybe for my mother and Trish and Mason Denton, love the Delta as much as I do. And, like, I love it. But you drive around it, and it feels sometimes like a failed experiment. And, you know, before synthetics were invented, petroleum synthetics were invented in 1933 in the DuPont laboratories. By the way, the DuPonts and Bryant families were connected back in South Carolina around the 1800. So Roy Bryant's great-grandmother was a DuPont. So the synthetics basically killed cotton. I mean, the price has never really recovered. I mean, cotton was $1 in 1919, and now it's 74 cents. But the farm, it feels like a failed experiment. You know, I've always thought about it that, you know, cotton was oil and Mississippi was Saudi Arabia. I mean, it was the most, like, everything was designed to extract a resource. So I say all of that to ask this question. You know, I'm from Clarksdale, you're from Drew, my mother is from Shelby. There are all of these towns that were built around an industry that not only no longer exists here, but really doesn't exist. When you are imagining a future that, you know, that your organization is working for in Drew, like, in your wildest dreams, what do you hope the future, and not the whole Delta, let's just do one town, what the future of Drew could be?
Oh, okay, the future Drew. Before I answer that, let me just also say that my mom and dad did talk to us a lot about, it's all about power. And she said, as long as they can keep you ignorant and don't know anything, you don't know how to read, you don't know math, then they're going to keep you down so that you can serve them. And so we got to break through that. We got to get that education. We got to know what's going on. And we got to educate ourselves. Now, in my wildest dreams, what I would want from Drew, Mississippi, well, first of all, I would love it if the young people, the ones who are in school now, would have some of the best schools there are. And when I say some of the best schools, I mean best schools equipped with the materials, the supplies, the teachers, all of that, just to teach them what they need to know. And I know right now that's still not happening. It's not happening because of the way the property taxes are and all that kind of stuff, and you know, they're not putting that much money into the school system. So that's still lacking a lot in terms of people learning what they need to know. And also, I would like, not only do they need to know how to read and how to write and how to do math and all that kind of stuff, I want them to know who they are as a human being, and that they are 100% human being, and that they're capable of being anything that they want to be. That's still not they're still not believing that I can be whatever it is I want to believe. So some kind of way we can teach them in a way to change their mindset around their possibilities, how wonderful they are as wonderful people they are. That's another thing that I in my wildest dream. Also in my wildest dream, I came back to Drew, and I really saw, I said, you know, these young people, everything in this town has a look of poverty. How do you break out of poverty if everything around you has the look of poverty? And so it's like, we got to change the landscape and what it looks like around here, and the way people think about what things should look like around here. And then when I was teaching my young people also, they were saying, like, Miss Dickerson, you're asking us to dream and think about possibilities, the unlimited possibilities. And what they would say to me was, this is all we know. How do you expect us to dream about something we've never seen anything else but this? So I started taking them out of the Delta and letting them see things, and letting them see the way people who are not in poverty live, and how they got there, and what they learned. So we also need to get them to start thinking in terms of those possibilities that also, in addition to teaching them about reading, writing, arithmetic, about life skills, and how they can be wherever they want to be, and making sure that they can. And then I like to see them as citizens come back and advocate for change. come back and have pride in their community and help us build a community so that other people would want to live in that community. So maybe we could bring some other people into the community and start to collect more taxes or whatever, but it'll be a beautiful place. It doesn't look like poverty. The wonderful schools. I did a video on that, all my dreams. Wonderful schools. Healthcare is another thing. Not a doctor in the town, not a nurse practitioner in the town. All that needs to change. Why is it? Why is it? And when I was growing up, I used to ask my mom, I said, Mom, why is it that all these other young people get to go away on camps and see stuff? And does that mean we can't go just because we're poor? And I said, that doesn't seem right. I'm a child. I want it just as much as that child over there wants it. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of hard to explain exactly what my biggest dream would be. And that they would grow up and they could thrive and they could get good jobs and they could pay their bills and they wouldn't have to worry about being hungry. And they have something to eat all the time. So what we do in Drew, we try to provide food. We do a goods online grocery where we pick up food for people who can't go get it themselves. We do those kinds of things, just trying to lift people so they would be more independent and more able, but they have the will and the desire to be that because they know it's possible. A lot of the things that they need in these towns is also around not only the things that you can see and feel and touch, which is very, very important because you can't see, feel, and touch. Then your mind starts to think there's nothing else out there. But they also need to feel good about who they are. You know what I mean when I say feel good about who they are. And society has really crushed us. I have to be honest, I think that we have been. Because I was crushed in that classroom. And it hadn't been for my mom and dad. We'd come home at night and she'd say, how did school go? And we'd say, Mom, it was horrible. It was awful. And then she would give us a lecture about how great we are. So my wildest dream is everybody in town know that they're great, know that society accepts them, know that there's some inclusiveness, know that they can get a job no matter what they look like, that they can thrive, they can be educated, they can learn, and they can be lifted out of poverty. Now, one thing I want to make sure I say is this. They can be lifted, but however, they do need help. And that's what we have to try to understand. A lot of people don't understand. To pull yourself by bootstrap, I don't know what a bootstrap is. What is that, Ms. Dickerson? You know what I'm saying? We need to come together as a country, as a nation, and help the ones that we can because the playing field has not been equalized at all. I realized that when I came back from the Kellogg Foundation. I had dinner with some of the richest people in the world, okay? Then I come back to Drew and I find people who can't even eat and the children are hungry. I'm like, there's something wrong with this picture. Why is it like this? What did they do? Let's say my 12-year-old who's hungry. What did that person do to deserve this? And so I don't want to keep going on and on and on, but you asked me what about my wildest dream. That's my wildest dream, that we can treat each other in a way that everybody has the possibility to thrive. Yeah.
Before we take some questions, I think the last thing I want to say is that, I'll ask myself a question to preempt it. This was a murder that happened 69 years ago. Many, many, many things have changed, and if you've been in Mississippi a long time, and I know a lot of you, you know it. This would have been impossible not that long ago. Many things have changed a tremendous amount. And yet, the erasure around the murder of Emmett Till, which this book chronicles, is a stand-in for every other erasure. If you go to the Ole Miss Library right now, and you get the famous Look magazine from 1956, they have a copy, but that article is torn out. If you go to the Delta State Library, they have the Look magazine from 1956, but that article is torn out. If you went to when the FBI came to reopen the case, they went to the courthouse in Sumner, Mississippi. Obviously, the most famous case ever tried in that courthouse was the murder trial of Emmett Till. They have the file folder is empty. The FBI had to find a copy on the Gulf Coast in the private collection of a citizen of the trial transcripts, or else there would have been no way to reopen the trial. The transcripts had been lost. Emmett Till's ring, which was in evidence, and when they redid the Sumner Courthouse, some of you might remember in 1973, Jack Bissell, the architect, redid the courthouse, and the ring went missing. It was still in the evidence locker, and so Emmett's famous ring is somewhere in the Delta. The murder weapon, when I was doing the book, I don't know if it's still there, but when I was doing the book, the murder weapon was in a safety deposit box in a bank in Greenwood, Mississippi. The erasure of this one case is startling. And so the question you get is, why are we still talking about this? And the answer is, because we haven't started. And I don't want to be doing it. I'd love to be writing about sports. But we're having this conversation because we still haven't had it. It'll be 70 years next August. And with that, I'd like everybody to please, big round of applause for Gloria. They really are doing God's work. I mean, the kids that are going through the Emmett Till Academy is really incredible. And then we've got a little time for questions, and then we will sign books. And I just want to say this is a real big crowd, and we're both very, very grateful that everybody took time out of their lives to come listen to us. A lot of familiar faces in the crowd. And it just means the world. So with that, if anybody's got any questions, let's rock and roll. All right, there we go. Yeah, no, it's you. You're good. Oh, hi. Speak to your familiar faces.
Yes. I just want to know what pushed you or pulled you, I guess, to do this. I never really heard. What inside of you made you want to tell this story?
So the question is, what pushed or pulled me to tell this story? It was during the pandemic. I was working on a story about a guy named Avery Bradley who played for the Los Angeles Lakers. Avery Bradley's entire family is from Mount Bio. And I started Googling around Bradley, Mount Bio, and it popped up that one of the witnesses in the Emmett Till murder trial was a farmer who was very close to your parents, probably knew her. I mean, Amanda Bradley. And Amanda Bradley, I wondered if she was related to Avery Bradley. And in the process of trying to find that out, she's not. But in the process of trying to find that out, I ended up on the phone with Patrick Weems, who said, "Have you ever been to the barn?" And I said, "What barn?" And it was shaking to me. I mean, I've made somewhat of a living off being a professional Deltan. And if the place you know, if you don't know something that fundamental about the place you think you know best in the world, it was really shaking. So, I mean, some of you will tell you, like, I didn't have an assignment. There wasn't a book deal. That all came later. I just wanted to know. And so I got obsessed. And I started driving over there all the time. At first, just to see it. It has a really bad energy about it. And so, like, I just was sort of pulled to it and repelled from it at the same time. And so that's how.
And then also you called me on the phone.
I did.
Who is this?
No, there was a little. Look, you were cautious but kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you were also the first person who was like, "Yeah, I know where that barn is," and then it started to open up because there is a deep omerta about it. This is true. The guy, Jeff, who owns the barn, who I just can't, like, he's lovely. Jeff bought the barn in 1994. His grandparents lived within eye shot of the barn. He grew up right around there. He bought it, didn't know the history of it, and then after he bought it, his father told him. You know, so the knowledge, it is known, but there is at least it feels to me and Drew like a deep sense of omerta that this didn't happen. You were right.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about Mamie Till's decision allow the photography in Jet magazines.
So the question is Mamie Till's decision to allow photographers to take pictures of Emmett's body and to have the open casket at the funeral. There were lots of lynchings in Mississippi in the summer of 1955 during this gubernatorial campaign. I mean, there were 3 or 4 pretty high-profile ones. One of those guys was Reverend George Lee in Belzona, and he was killed and his face was blown off with a shotgun. And his wife decided to have an open casket funeral. So this was in the air. And Mamie, they find the body, and Sheriff Strider immediately tries to bury the body. They dug a hole on, I don't know if you're going from Greenwood, like you're going toward Highway 8 in Menor City on the Money Road, and you take a right on Whaley Road, which will take you like over toward Teoc. So that road used to be called Dark Fear Road. And that's the road where Moses Wright lived. That's where Emmett was kidnapped. Was a house on that road, like going out to the cotton gin that's on, I guess that's Highway 7. And so there's a cemetery out there, the East Money Church of God in Christ, where Moses Wright was the pastor. And so there was a hole dug, there was a hearse there with a casket in it. A member of the steel, Mr. Moody, a member of the Steelworkers Union, one of the heads of the Steelworkers Union in Chicago, lived on St. Lawrence Street in the south side of Chicago where Mamie and Emmett lived. And nobody knew the name Emmett. Everybody called him Bobo. I mean, the first time Wheeler Parker really ever knew the name Emmett was in the newspapers. I mean, everybody called him Bobo. That was his nickname. And so Mr. Moody comes over to the house because they're almost like sitting Shiva at this point. They're waiting. They know that he's missing, but they haven't found the body. And the whole family is in this house, jumping every time the telephone rings, hoping someone's going to say, we found him. And so he comes over just because there's a commotion. He doesn't know what's going on. And so he says, Mamie's weeping. And he's like, what's going on? And he's like, they took Emmett. And he's like, who's Emmett? And she's like, Bobo, Mr. Moody. They took Bobo. And the blood ran out of his face. And he left the room. And the Chicago Steelworkers went to war for Emmett Till. I mean, they went to war. They called Mayor Daley. They called the governor. And the governor of Illinois called the governor of Mississippi. And they stopped the burial. Like, they were there about to bury him. And then no one would have ever known the name Emmett Till. No one would have ever known what had happened. And so the fact that she did that, one of the details that just kills me as a parent is she insisted on an open casket funeral, but when she went up for the last time at the funeral and kneeled in it, she closed her eyes because she couldn't look. Yes, sir.
I think your own story may be instructive. You talk about how you never knew Emmett Till until you left Clarksdale for college.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I learned a lot of civil rights history in our house. My dad and Aaron Henry were co-chairs of the Oklahoma County Democratic Party. So Mr. Henry, in his big, deep, booming voice, would call the house at like 5:30 in the morning. He would wake my dad up. He was not an early riser. So I learned a lot of history, but I didn't know that particular bit of the history. I mean, look, you know, I had my 8th grade American history teacher at Lee literally, I see 2 nods there from people, literally called it the War of Northern Aggression. Like that was what you had to write on the test. You know, the omerta is real. I didn't know it. And, you know, like, it's interesting because the last thing the world needs is one more sort of whiny, guilty Southerner, you know. So like I don't like that energy. You know, it's really in vogue now for people to go find an ancestor, like a straw ancestor in the past, Confederates in the attic, and then beat on them to somehow protect yourself in the cultural moment. And like, I don't like that energy at all. But, you know, I mean, I had one family member who's in the book. I'm going to get a phone call about it. I'm just waiting. Because, and I tried to not do it, but the guy kept inserting himself into the news cycles in 1955 in the Jackson paper, writing letters. He was a president of the Jackson Citizens Council. And was like, finally, I was just like, look, I tried to leave him out. Like, just because, I mean, no, like, I just didn't want I just was like, I don't need this. But he just kept smugly inserting himself into it. And so, one of the things I think is interesting is so much of all of our histories is actually out there. I mean, you can go to the Sovereignty Commission website, search your name. It's something. You know, like it's the history is there. It's not that the history is there. It's that we often don't ever interact with it. Go to newspapers.com and read a week of newspapers from 1955. It's unbelievable the stuff the candidates for governor were saying from the stump. It's effing bananas. Like, you can't even believe it. And so the history is all there. I sometimes think, I don't know, I mean, the last thing in the world I need to be doing in front of this many people is thinking out loud. But it occurs to me that, you know, so many things got better a little that I think people are like, let's just not talk about it. Like, let's just, and, you know, I think that instinct, in some people that instinct has malice, and I think in some people that people are trying to do the best they can. But I think that instinct to not talk about it has led us to 70 years later, we haven't even started the process of building a new tribe of us, where when you think of a Mississippian, you think of Muddy Waters and Elvis Presley, and you think of Jesmond Ward and William Faulkner, and you think of P.S.A. Lehman and Natasha Trethewey. And like, I just don't even think we've really, the lesson to me from reporting the book, this is not I'm not smart enough or educated enough to have this opinion, it's just the information coming back, is that we haven't even really started the project. There, and then I see.
Was the barn ever investigated for forensic evidence?
The FBI came and completely turned it inside out. The floorboards that were on the barn had been ripped out many years before, so they went in with the with screens and tried to do it. But I mean, if you're from some like, this is that thick gumbo buckshot. I mean, you can't. Gloria and I got stuck once driving. I stepped out of the car to try to push, and just my shoes came off in it. I mean, you know, that gumbo buckshot mud is alive, and so no. I mean, there's been lots of other forensics done, but not in the barn. Yes, sir.
Yeah, speaking of the barn, looking back, was it a couple of years ago, Gloria, the 67th anniversary, the beautiful memorial that you organized for that August day to memorialize murder, and the access to the barn that you were able to get that day, where I brought Gary Burnside in to do an amazing, beautiful original song. Will those kinds of events continue, or is access, what is either the appropriateness or the ability to access the barn in the future, and what are your thoughts?
We did that a couple of years ago, but we did the second anniversary and did the third anniversary in August 31st. So it still goes on. Mm-hmm. And also we do Mississippi Delta Civil Rights Tours, and so we still have colleges from all over the country coming, and the barn is accessible. I mean, Jeff, he said, yeah, they can come. I mean, so he doesn't try to restrict any visitors from coming. So I've taken a lot of people out there to see the barn. Most of those people are from outside Mississippi who want to come into Mississippi and see what happened in the barn and where Emmett Till was killed. So yes, it's very, very accessible now. If you want to come, go to the barn, feel free. Contact me and we can take you out to the barn. It's real accessible.
Yeah, for real. Either one of us. Yes, sir.
How you doing, Ray?
Oh, hey. Speaking of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, Reverend, would you please stand up for a second? I'm going to embarrass you.
I have to.
No, you don't. Just everybody give him a real big round. Now that I've embarrassed you, you can ask your question.
Yeah, just reflecting and I've been sitting here listening. And, you know, your book. You know, ultimately, I hope, you know, the goals of books, a lot of information, because I hadn't read the entire book. I have read bits and pieces. But being involved in this work since '07 myself, when the public apology was made in '07. And I, you know, being chair of the board of this organization, it's just really, since I've been in, I was born and raised in the Delta. Born in 1955. And, you know, I'm a person that really believe the best is still yet to come. And so I do think, how do, you know, the gentleman just asked a question about the barn, and I remember the first, I grew up in the Delta. So I went to the barn probably maybe the same time, somewhere in there, when you discovered the barn. I first went there, Patrick and I met the owner, because Patrick had been, but since then, the barn to me just, I just see it as a sacred place. Every time I go there, I just, I think about what happened. But my goal is, and Patrick and I, we talked a lot about somewhat what Gloria was talking about. How do we bring the beauty out of the ashes? How do we, the healing part of individual healing, community healing, and this kind of work, I think all of it have to go together to try to. So I'm just, you know, and since I met you, man, I mean, you know, when you mentioned the trip to D.C., I think you were with us when we went to the White House in D.C., but I was with that group when we went to the African American Museum. They opened it just for us. And what I really want to just kind of piggyback on Wheeler, I met Wheeler in '07. And in '07, I went to Money, Mississippi with Wheeler and Simeon on the bus. I grew up in Middle City. So I grew up going to Money, not knowing, going in the store. I had no idea the history of the store. And so when I went to Money, Mississippi with Wheeler and Simeon, and I stood beside those guys. I don't know if they ever been back to Money, but I just felt so connected with the pain and you know, they was there in '55. I wasn't. I'm just so I full circle for me. I don't know. I'm grateful to be a part of this work, but it's just really been. It's been a hard go, man, to just live into it and try to, think about our children and what do we do with this? Where do we go? I think we got to keep fighting. We got to keep the flame and say, hey, we can do better, man. And so I don't know. I'm just.
Well, it is a difference in people. You said you only heard about it. I knew about it since I was like 8, 9, or 10 years old because it was taught in the home, and my mom talked a lot about fighting for justice and equality and things like that while we were children. And so one of the things I think we do have to do, we are having a memorial 70th year, and we're inviting all y'all to come out. It's going to really, really be big, we hope, for the 70th year in 2025. But one of the things we need to do is what has happened to us. So things like Emmett Till, where he got killed, and he was not the only one. All that stuff had happened to us, and we kept silent about it. even the people who knew about it, African Americans who knew about it, kept silent about it. And we need to not keep silent about it. We got to put the truth out there, particularly for our young people. They need to know, because they're wondering, where did all this stuff come from? Who created all of this mess that we're in right now? And we need to really keep exposing and teaching and telling the story and helping our young people to know why has it affected me this way? Yeah. Because now they know that what had happened back in, I teach them stuff, they know that what happened in 1955, 1964, 1965, all of that, they realize that that stuff is still affecting what happens in their life today. And so they're in a position where they're saying, I know it happened, we're not going to stop us from going where we want to go. So we got to start talking about it and telling people rather than being quiet, and people go on, and especially the young people go around and say, well, I don't know what we need to do to get out of this, because I don't even know how we got in this, you know what I'm saying? And the next generation is going to come up and say the same thing, unless we start opening our mouth, being honest about what has gotten us to this point, and then trying to get people to start thinking differently about some things. I mean, we're all going to have to think differently about how we feel about other people. That's another thing. And so and it's like you said, there need to be some healing. So my vision was also at the barn, the acreage and the whole thing, the way it looks out there. Yeah. It would be a great place for healing. It would. Great place for healing, a retreat center, a healing space, a place of consciousness or something.
But I think for me, not that I didn't know. I was born in '55, but I heard this and this. I knew the name Emmett Till as I got older. You know, my parents mentioned Emmett Till. My grandmother mentioned Emmett Till. My grandmother was good friend with Crosby Smith, who was Emmett's uncle. I knew him. You know, it wasn't that it wasn't talked about, but it wasn't talked about publicly. It wasn't, you know, what we're doing today. It was way away from that. So we do have a different atmosphere as far as, you know, equipping and doing the right thing, doing the things that could help all of us be a better place. And that's what I'm saying. My thing was when I grew up in Minnesota City, grew up in LaFleur County, and the money store, when I was there the other week when we had the memorial, I didn't get a chance to come to the barn, but I took my family back to the money store. And I'm visiting in my mind when I was a teenager, I walked in this store, I purchased stuff in this store, I bought stuff in this store. But I didn't know this store was a store that Emmett. I mean, you know, when I was 15, 16 years old, I didn't know that.
And you know, the real climax at the end of the book is in the courthouse in Sumner, and the two speakers that day who just laid me and everybody else low were Reverend Williams and Gloria. I mean, I think that if I remember right, you know, the people from the Park Service were pretty nervous when you started preaching. You know, the government folks don't like it when they start. But I think you preached about one blood, and so I think that we're gonna. You know, I think we're out of time. We're gonna be signing, but like we could talk. But like the thing to end on is that you gave that's it. I mean, it's a book about 1,000 things. But it's really super simple. It's a prayer about one blood. And I appreciate everybody so much for coming out tonight.